For any fan of homebrew C64 games, RGCD's yearly 16K cartridge compo is easily the highlight. With veteran and fresh developers taking the time out to test their coding skills and create a whole bunch of awesome new games, there have been plenty of highlights, and 2014's contest was no exception to the rule. Now, these games are all free to download. I will include links below, and you can easily run them on a C64 emulator, such as Vice or CCS64. But if you happen to have hardware like an Easy Flash cartridge or the 1541 Ultimate, you can easily copy this over and play those on real hardware, which is the way I prefer to do it as well. The plan is to give you a roundup of all the entries for the contest, 17 new games, just talk about them, show them in action, and provide my thoughts about each one before I conclude with a top 3 of the entire series. I'm going to split this up into 2 parts, just because 17 games and seeing a bit that's going to make for quite a long video. So sit back, grab a drink, and enjoy the show. Kicking things off, the first entry is Aviator Arcade, a vertically scrolling shmup in which you pilot a helicopter and blast your way through a number of locations occupied by enemy forces. Whilst there's only 3 levels, they're all jam-packed with a lot of enemy emplacements and vehicles to battle through. The graphics are nice and crisp, there's some great in-game music, and a rarity for 64 games, combined with sound effects at the same time, and there are some great, tight and responsive controls. One thing I really appreciated was the fact that, unlike most shmups, you have an actual energy bar, so you can take several hits before you lose a life. That's something that a lot of shmups lack, as a way to add challenge to the game. This, however, is countered by the fact that when you die, the level is restarted, you don't continue where you leave off. That's something that most shooters do in order to balance. Despite that bit of design, this is one fun game, and if you're a fan of the genre, it's definitely worth giving a spin. Even if you're not a shmup fan, try it out anyway. One of the things I found is that it's a little easier compared to a lot of other shmups that were released on the C64. Next up on the list is Brickbuster, which, as the name states, is a game that's in the tradition of Breakout or Arkanoid. To be honest, I think it's more the latter, as it includes power-ups, which is Arkanoid's defining characteristics. So you should know the drill by now. You move the paddle, you deflect the ball to hit the bricks, you collect the power-ups and score all the points. One thing I like is the level layouts are a little more different than other games in the genre, and the power-ups are also fairly unique. Like, you don't just have the usual catch, extend, extended paddle, shrink the paddle, like weaponry style things that Arkanoid have. You can get multiple balls, but it's a little more controlled. The other little addition I thought was neat was the fact that you have a time limit for each level. It really puts the pressure on you to actually use your ball and target the bricks well. Now, one thing I have to note, the footage you're seeing here was taken from the original competition release, which was only controlled with the joystick. They're great joystick controls, they feel really good, and if you have a joystick, it's the best way to play the game. However, if you're lucky enough to have paddles for the C64, there was a later release, which I'll include a link to, that includes paddle support. And to be honest, that's how you really need to play these games. It's really well presented, it's really good fun to play, and it's another one worth checking out. And now it's time to go for a bit of maze action with Brilliant Maze. Inside this maze, your task is fairly simple. You explore the maze, you need to locate the 4 gems that are spread around it, and avoiding the creatures that patrol it. Now, as you work to avoid the maze and find the gems, there are also a number of power-ups located that will give you the edge. So, one of the things I really wasn't a fan with are the controls. It's a game that really is about tight navigation. In fact, it's something that Pac-Man is well known for. And one of the things I found was that when you're coming to turn corners, you have to basically hold the joystick in a direction continuously. Whereas Pac-Man, you just need to tap it in the direction at the right point. So what I found was I frequently missed the timing for corners and ran into enemies a lot of the time. Now, that's a personal preference, and you might not be as frustrated with that as I was. So check it out regardless. It's well presented, there's some great music in there. But it's the type of game I think you need to have a certain mindset for, and I found it didn't quite work out so well for me. Now, after having covered some arcade-style games, we go for something a little more sedate, with C2048, which is an interpretation of the well-known game 2048, a clone of indie hit 3's. The basic idea is to match the pairs of numbers in increasing amounts until you reach 2048. So the controls are straightforward. You just push the joystick in the given direction to move the blocks in that direction. Now, as you do this, blocks will collide with each other, matching pairs, and as they match, they'll combine. So that means if you slide 2 blocks with 2, they'll combine into a 4 block, which you then need to match with another 4 block, and it becomes an 8, and so on and so on. Every pair you match increases your score, and the idea really is to basically keep matching numbers as long as you can until you fill the grid up and can't make any more moves. The graphics are really crisp here. They look really nice. There's a good use of high-res mode, and there's some really nice synth music playing in the background to keep you in the move. It's a very fun little puzzle game, and it's quite a good fit for the C64, so definitely do check it out. And now for a bit of another genre shift, as here we're looking at falling, where, well, the objective is pretty straightforward. Keep the ball bouncing and moving down the screen as long as possible. It's a fairly tough game, as the only control you have is really just to be able to time a bounce with the fire button. So the idea is you're carefully timing your button presses to keep your ball bouncing and avoiding obstacles, whether it's the top of the screen, the bottom of the screen, the little spikes that appear on platforms, or mounted on the walls. Along the way, you'll find a number of collectible objects, sort of balls, and those will give you a score boost. And it's really a case of just timing your jumps to bounce through the level, of keep bouncing down the platforms, avoiding the obstacles, and racking up as much points as possible. It's one heck of a tough game, but it's the kind of challenge that is really good fun. It's the kind of game where you might mess it up, but you can dive straight back in and try again and see if you can get a better score. I'm not very good at this, but it is one really well put together game that I do enjoy, that I have really enjoyed checking out. Keeping on the one button control theme, we now look at Fickle. Fickle is a charming little puzzle game which was actually ported by the author from a version he originally put together for the VIC-20. This C64 version takes the basic gameplay of that game, but adds much nicer graphics and sound. The goal is straightforward. Basically get Fickle to the goal by moving through the maze. Unlike most games where you directly control Fickle, here all you can really do is change his mood. He has a green mood, which allows him to interact with items on the level. There's teleporters or switches, or the rotors, which use him to change his direction. But you can also switch to his red mood. In this mood, he bounces along the level, meaning he ignores those items, but can be stopped by stores, walls, or other obstacles. So the trick is simply to manage Fickle's mood, hence the name I guess, in such a way that you can flip the right switches, hit the right rotors to turn the path correctly to line you up and get to the exit of the maze, instead of heading into the tricky walls of spikes. It's charming and it's fun, and once you get grips with how navigating around the maze works, you find it's really solid fun. From one button games to one joystick games, as we've got Honeybee Remix. Here it's a simple enough game. Take your bee around each of the screens, avoiding the critters and obstacles and the environment, to go to each flower, in turn collect its pollen and return it to your hive. Now, the challenge comes from the fact that you can only do that for one flower at a time, so you need to go through, duck your way through the obstacles, collect the pollen, return to the hive, make sure you don't mess up dropping it, and try to get it done as fast as possible to maximize your bonus. Because it's all about the sweet bonus points. The graphics are really bright and colourful. The music's charming enough. One of the things I felt was a little unfair when starting out playing it were the collisions. The level design, you try to, for a game that's about trying to beat the clock, there's a tendency to want to try and come really close to scenery to try and have the shortest path. One of the things I found is that the collisions are very, very pixel accurate. You get used to it after a while, and then the game just flows and unlocks. But until then, I tended to be a little more frustrated when starting out. It actually took me a fair few goes before the game really clicked and I started to enjoy it. But despite that, it is a really fun little game, and it's a nice little arcade take on something that's not quite as common on the 64 these days. So definitely give it a whirl. Now for the final game in this first part of the roundup, and that's Mini Arcade Climax. It's a little different from the others here, in that whilst, like a few others, it was a conversion of something from another platform, that source platform was a handheld LCD game. It was the game that the author was the first game he ever played, so it's a bit of a tribute, which I think is a cool little idea. As for the game itself, the basic idea is that you're tasked with fixing a number of pipes. And this is done by moving across the playfield from where you start, getting to the other side to pick up a wrench, whilst avoiding the electrical sparks and the water leaks that are coming from other pipes on the playfield. And this is where the challenge comes in. You can really only safely move to a number of safe spots, and in tradition of these handheld games, you basically move from one position to the other. You don't have, you don't navigate across the playfield, you sort of jump between those spots. And one of the things is, I actually found this really tough. In fact, for me personally, it was too tough in that I frequently would move and I'd try to move from one point to another because there was a spark or something about to come, and I'd move straight into a spark. I died way too often when playing this, as you can see from the footage, that it just never really clicked with me. It might be something that you might enjoy. I mean, for me, these kind of handheld games weren't a particularly big part of my childhood experiences with games, so maybe it's something you'll find and enjoy a lot more than I did. So there we are with the first half of the entries in the roundup. Now, there's still a lot more games to go. As I said, it's going to be a two-part special, so don't go far away. You should see an annotation link to where part 2 is when it's up. Failing that, you can always download the games yourself and check them out. Thanks again for watching. If you enjoyed this one, consider a thumbs up or a comment. I would love to hear what you think about the games that have been shown so far. Any favourites, any standouts for you. And catch you next time for part 2.